Usually when we talk about the foundation of a building, there's this expectation of absolute unshakable stability.
Right.
Like you look at the skyscraper and you just trust that beneath the street level, there's all this steel and concrete anchored right into the bedrock. You don't even question it.
No, of course not. You assume the structural integrity is just a given. I mean, it's binary, right? The building is either supported or it collapses. The physics of it don't change based on how you feel about them.
Exactly. But then you start looking into the actual architecture of our modern society, our cultural, legal, and financial institutions. And suddenly that assumption of stability starts to look, well, honestly, it kind of looks like a mirage.
Yeah, total mirage.
You realize the foundation might not just be cracking, it might have been entirely replaced while you weren't even looking.
It's basically the absolute definition of institutional quicksand. The ground is literally shifting, and the blueprints we all thought we were using have been, fundamentally rewritten. And without any public consensus, really.
And that shifting ground is exactly what we're exploring today. So, welcome to this deep dive. Now, before we really tear into the blueprints of modern society, I just want to ask a really quick favor. Take a second to like and subscribe to the show.
Yeah, please do.
It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these extensive explorations. So today we are taking on a massive, comprehensive review of a highly provocative new ebook published in 2025. It's called The Gods Among Us, an Unfiltered Revelation by Conrad Riker.
And it is a heavy one.
It really is. And right off the bat, if this topic hooks you, you can grab this book on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. You should also definitely follow the author at the handle @Conrad N. Riker on Substack.
Yeah, because it's a text that it really does not pull a single punch. It's designed to be jarring.
Not one punch. And we need to be crystal clear about our mission today and who this text is actually speaking to. This book is explicitly written as a manifesto. Its target audience is men's rights activists and red-pilled manosphere men.
Right, that's the core demographic he's aiming at.
Exactly. So the stated mission of this deep dive is to objectively unpack Riker's core thesis, which is understanding the history of our institutions and how, according to the author anyway, they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies before most people even realized the war was happening.
And because this source material contains highly politically charged content, touching on everything from gender dynamics to institutional capture, we are strictly acting as impartial guides today.
Yeah, that is a crucial point for you, the listener, to keep in mind. We are not taking sides here.
Definitely not.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content, nor are we condemning them. We are simply reporting on and analyzing the ideas contained in the original source material. Our job is just to help you understand the author's arguments, the data he uses to back them up, and the historical precedents he points to.
Right, we're just mapping the territory he lays out.
Exactly, we're examining the architecture of his argument.
And Riker's argument, it begins with this sweeping historical contrast that really sets the tone for the whole book. He looks at how society used to revere masculine strength, how it relied on it for survival, versus how it actively treats it today.
Right, so he opens by taking us way back to the year 480 BC, the Battle of Thermopylae. He points to the 300 Spartan warriors holding off this massive Persian army at the Hot Gates.
Yeah, the classic Spartan stand.
Right, and for Riker, this isn't just a history lesson. It is the ultimate historical touchstone for masculine sacrifice, discipline, and uncompromising strength. To him, it's the archetype of men standing in the breach so that civilization can survive behind them.
And he immediately juxtaposes those 300 Spartans with what he calls the modern equivalent, which is 300 gender studies majors at a modern university.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's quite the pivot.
Yeah, and he points out that today, those students would likely demand trigger warnings just for reading Herodotus's historical account of that very battle. He actually highlights specific modern institutions, like the University of Michigan, offering cry closets during finals week.
Which, if you haven't heard of them, are literal soundproof rooms stocked with coloring books and Play-Doh for college students who are overwhelmed by exams.
Exactly, Play-Doh.
Yeah.
He uses this really stark contrast, Spartans facing death versus adult students seeking refuge with Play-Doh to illustrate a civilization-level shift. Riker argues that modern society doesn't just misunderstand traditional male strength, it actually actively hates it and sabotages it.
Huh. So he thinks society views it as a threat.
More like a sickness. He says society views masculine instinct, the drive to compete, to conquer, to endure, as a disease that needs to be cured rather than an asset that needs to be harnessed.
Okay, let's unpack this, because he introduces a really specific mechanism for how this happens, which he calls the weakness loop. It's not just a cultural attitude, right? It's a systemic process.
Right, the weakness loop is this fascinating sociological framework he builds. He posits that it starts very early in childhood. So, natural, biological, boyish behavior is immediately medicalized in the modern classroom.
Like how?
Well, if a young boy is highly energetic, competitive, or engages in, like, rough and tumble play fighting, he isn't seen as a normal boy developing primal instincts and learning physical boundaries.
Right, he's a problem.
Exactly. Instead, he's diagnosed with an attention or hyperactivity disorder and just handed a prescription for Ritalin.
Wow. So the system effectively drugs the boy to make him compliant.
That's his argument, yeah.
Yeah.
And the school system outlaws games like dodgeball because they're deemed too aggressive or exclusionary. Boys are conditioned to become softer. And then, according to Riker, the second phase of the loop kicks in.
Which is what?
Because natural male competitiveness has been suppressed and pathologized, women and progressive advocates push for state-backed fairness and equity initiatives. The system then forces average results, artificially leveling the playing field.
Oh, I see. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy of enforced mediocrity.
Exactly. And this is where Riker moves from just like cultural observation to biological data, which is where his argument gets highly specific. He doesn't just think men are acting softer, he claims they are biologically degrading.
Biologically degrading, that's a huge claim.
Yeah, he cites research showing a 25% drop in men's average testosterone levels since 1980.
Wait, 25%?
Yes. And even more startling, he points to a 59% global decline in sperm counts since 1973.
Wait, let me stop you there, because that is a massive claim. Is Riker claiming this biological drop is purely psychological, like men are just sad and their testosterone drops, or does he point to specific environmental factors driving this?
He points to a convergence of both, which is why he calls it a war. Riker breaks down the mechanisms. On the physical side, he blames the modern, sedentary, screen-heavy lifestyle combined with the absolute explosion of endocrine-disrupting chemicals in our environment.
Like in plastics and stuff.
Exactly. He specifically targets phthalates and microplastics, which basically mimic estrogen in the male body. They essentially trick the endocrine system into halting testosterone production.
That's terrifying if true.
Right. But on the psychological side, he argues that biology responds to environment. If a man is placed in a cubicle, stripped of physical competition, and constantly told his natural aggressive instincts are toxic, his biology literally downregulates.
So the body adapts to the cubicle.
Yeah. And for Riker, this 1973 to the day time frame is just an evolutionary blink of an eye. You cannot have genetic shift that fast. Therefore, he concludes it must be an environmental and cultural poisoning.
And he grounds this in very specific modern examples of how institutions enforce this softening, right? Like, he shares the story of a guy named Mike, an Army Ranger.
Yeah, the Mike story is wild.
It is. So Mike's platoon was handed a mandate from command to integrate recruits who physically could not carry 50-pound packs over a 10-mile hike. And the military called this inclusive readiness.
Right.
Riker looks at that and asks a completely valid logistical question. He says, when did surviving a war zone become an exercise in equity?
Right, because Riker argues that inclusive readiness is an oxymoron in a life or death scenario. Equity frameworks, in his view, allow people to feel like they can compete. But the tyranny is pretending that biological differences don't exist,
Yeah.
Like, everyone has already won by just showing up.
Yeah, lowering the bar so nobody fails.
Exactly. By lowering the physical standards for combat readiness just to ensure a diverse demographic spread, Riker claims the institution is literally willing to risk the lives of the capable to satisfy ideological quotas. Quotas set by bureaucrats who have never seen combat.
And it bleeds out from the military into civilian life, too. He brings up the business model of Planet Fitness.
Oh, this part was fascinating.
Yeah. He claims they systematically replaced half of their heavy free weights with pastel resistance bands and Smith machines in the name of being inclusive and creating a, quote, judgment-free zone. And the result of alienating their core male demographic. According to his data, their membership cratered by 44% in a 6-month period. He says, real men vote with their feet and their wallets. He sees this as a deliberate corporate attempt to medicalize and soften masculinity.
It is an attempt to redefine what is culturally acceptable behavior in public spaces. But this redefinition doesn't stop at the gym or the military base. I mean, it extends deeply into our foundational myths and storytelling.
Yeah, the pop culture stuff.
Riker devotes significant space to how modern academia and pop culture are actively rewriting mythology to neutralize male archetypes.
This part really blew my mind because it's so subtle until you see it. Like, he looks at Marvel's Thor, Ragnarok. Thor is the Norse god of thunder. Historically, he is a figure of absolute terrifying elemental power.
Yeah, a literal god of war.
Right. And Hollywood turns him into what Riker calls a quippy slapstick clown, making self-deprecating jokes and treating his hammer like a Freudian punchline.
It totally defangs the myth.
Exactly. And he points to Disney neutralizing Hercules, taking this incredibly dark, violent, tragic story of a demigod's labors and turning it into this crooning, sanitized Broadway ballad.
But the academic examples he provides are even more stark because they deal with historical record rather than just fiction.
Like what?
Well, Riker cites an incident where a Princeton professor was reportedly fired for pointing out in a lecture that Athena's owl, in ancient Greek tradition, symbolized patriarchal wisdom and the structural order of the city-state.
Fired for teaching history?
Yeah, the students filed complaints claiming this historical observation triggered them and made the classroom unsafe. Riker uses this to show that even historical fact is now subject to the veto of modern emotional fragility. The warrior spirit, the cunning of Odysseus, the raw elemental power of Zeus, it is all being systematically neutered and apologized for.
So I have to use an analogy here to capture what Riker is saying because it sounds like he is describing a massive evolutionary mismatch.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's like taking a wild predator, let's say a lion, that has evolved over millions of years for high-stakes survival, hunting, and physical dominance, right?
Right.
And putting it in a sterile, padded zoo enclosure.
Right.
The environment is perfectly safe, there's no risk, but the animal's neurochemistry goes absolutely haywire because its biological hardware doesn't match its software anymore. And then the zookeepers actively punish the lion every time it acts like a lion, demanding it eat kale instead of meat. It's unnatural.
That's exactly his point.
But I have to push back here, representing the skeptical listener. Is it possible these institutional changes, like schools banning dodgeball to prevent bullying, or gyms introducing resistance bands to appeal to beginners, were implemented simply to broaden access, increase efficiency, and reduce corporate liability, rather than being a deliberate, orchestrated war on men, as Riker claims?
Well, that is the standard institutional defense, yes.
Oh.
That these are benign modernizations meant to create safer, more accessible environments for the average person. But here is why Riker rejects that and views this as a deliberate capture. He looks at the historical outputs of unapologetic masculine dominance. He notes that 89% of ancient chief deities across all human civilizations were male. He points out that 94% of Nobel laureates in the hard sciences historically are male.
Those are stark numbers.
Yeah, and from Riker's perspective, that level of historical greatness, infrastructure building, and civilizational advancement requires a dominance hierarchy. It requires the precise kind of aggressive, competitive, uncompromising drive that modern equity frameworks inherently oppose and seek to dismantle.
So he thinks it's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. To him, the suppression isn't an accident of modernization. It is a targeted feature of a system that despises natural hierarchy and wants to make everyone equally dependent on the state.
So if we follow his logic, if biology, natural competition, and physical strength are being systematically suppressed in the public square, how does this defensive posture translate to the private lives of men? How does this play out behind closed doors when a man just tries to build a life? Well, according to Riker, the exact same suppression mechanisms have been copy-pasted into the domestic sphere, specifically into modern marriage and family courts.
Exactly. If the first part of his thesis is about the biological and cultural war on men, this next phase is about the legal and financial war. Riker argues that the institution of marriage has been entirely inverted over the last 50 years.
Inverted how?
Well, what was historically a sacred, culturally enforced bond of mutual duty has been transformed, in his words, into a legalized shakedown.
He is absolutely unsparing here. He traces this back to the advent of no-fault divorce laws in the 1970s. Now, historically, these were marketed to the public as a massive triumph of women's liberation. You know, a necessary legal mechanism to allow women to escape toxic or abusive situations without having to prove infidelity or cruelty in open court.
Right, which sounds reasonable on paper.
Right. But Riker claims that in practice today, no-fault divorce acts as a massive wealth transfer scheme and literally a Marxist re-education camp for men.
And he builds this case not just with theory, but through these incredibly vivid, painful anecdotes that highlight the legal mechanisms at play. He introduces us to Dave from Akron.
Oh man, Dave's story.
Yeah, Dave is a middle-aged guy working 3 separate jobs. He drives for Uber during the day, he stocks shelves at Walmart in the evening, and he works overnight security on the weekends.
3 jobs, that's insane.
Why is he doing that? Because he is mandated by a family court to pay $4,500 a month in alimony to his ex-wife.
Wow.
And what is she doing according to Riker? She is doing beachside yoga sessions with a new partner, having unilaterally dissolved the marriage because she simply wanted to, quote, find herself.
So Dave is basically indentured to his own past. His labor is no longer his own.
Exactly.
Then there's John, a Texas firefighter. John spent $250,000 in court fees, $250,000.
Unbelievable.
He spent all that money to successfully prove to a judge that his ex-wife had a severe active meth habit and was a danger to their children. And after proving that beyond a shadow of a doubt, what did the court grant him? Weekend access to his kids. That's it.
That's heartbreaking.
The mother retained primary custody. So Riker uses these stories to show that the system doesn't care about justice, and it certainly doesn't care about the traditional definition of fitness. It cares about enforcing a specific financial dynamic.
And he anchors these emotional anecdotes in hard demographic data from the CDC and the Census Bureau. Riker points out that 73% of divorces are initiated by women.
73%.
Yes. Furthermore, men pay roughly 97% of all alimony. So when you look at those numbers through Riker's lens, you see a systemic incentive structure where one party can unilaterally break the contract for any reason or no reason at all and still be guaranteed the financial spoils of the other party's future labor by force of state law.
It's not just an American phenomenon either. This is where the scope of the book really expands. He takes us over to Japan to look at a guy named Hiroto Sato.
Right, the Japanese salaryman.
Well, former salaryman. Sato used to make $80,000 a year. He had the corporate job, the tailored suits, the business cards, the whole socially approved path to being a good provider. But he quit.
Why did he quit?
Well, now he lives in a tiny studio apartment in Osaka, does voiceovers for adult video games to pay his meager rent, eats ramen, and builds Gundam models. Sato told Riker, quote, "Salaryman culture was slavery with business cards."
Wow.
And Sato isn't an anomaly. He is part of a massive demographic trend. Riker cites that 47% of Japanese men aged 18 to 34 have not had sex. They have completely checked out of the dating, marriage, and corporate provider markets. They're on what Riker calls a marriage strike.
And this is a crucial concept in the book. The herbivore men of Japan, as they are sometimes called in sociology, they are not failing to participate because they are incompetent. They are actively refusing to participate because they have analyzed the risk-to-reward ratio.
Right, they've done math.
Exactly. Riker argues they have done the math. They see that modern society wants them to act like a 1950s stoic provider who pays for everything, but simultaneously demands 2020's hypersensitivity and emotional vulnerability, which he calls a biological and psychological impossibility.
It's a double bind.
Right. So highly intelligent, capable men simply vanish from the plantation. They opt out entirely.
And the state's reaction to men asserting their rights or trying to maintain traditional boundaries is terrifying, according to Riker. Like, he tells the story of Lars in Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh, this one is crazy.
Lars was literally arrested for gender discrimination because he asked his wife to breastfeed their newborn child instead of formula feeding, citing the biological benefit.
Arrested for that.
Yes, the state stepped in and deemed that simple request discriminatory and controlling. Meanwhile, Riker notes that the World Health Organization reported a 30% spike in Swedish male suicides immediately after the country introduced mandatory state-enforced paternity leave that separated men from their professional identities.
That's a massive spike.
Right. Riker argues that men thrive when they lead, build, and protect, not when the state reduces them to latte-sipping appendages to a bureaucratic nanny state.
Which brings us to the core mechanism Riker identifies in the family court system, which is absolutely essential to understand his whole framework.
Yeah.
He argues that the legal standard of the best interest of the child, which sounds wonderful on paper, is actually just feminist newspeak for the mother's interest.
Right. He says it's a cover.
He dives really deep into the financial incentives here, specifically pointing to Title IV DD of the Social Security Act in the U.S.
Actually, let's pause here because this is one of those concepts that sounds like boring legalese, but Riker claims it is the literal engine of the whole machine.
It is the engine, yeah.
Yeah. Break down the exact mathematical incentive of Title IV-V. Like, how does the state actually get a cut?
So it is a matching funds program. Under Title IV-V, the federal government reimburses states for the administrative costs of running their child support enforcement programs.
Okay.
The more child support a state court orders and collects, the more federal funding the state government receives.
Wait, really?
Yes. So let's say the state extracts $1,000 a month from Dave in Akron. The federal government looks at the state's enforcement metrics and sends federal tax dollars to the state's general or agency funds as a reward for high collection rates.
Oh, wow. So they're financially incentivized to maximize the payout.
Exactly. Riker argues this creates a perverse underlying financial motive for family courts, which he says act more like administrative tribunals than traditional courts of law to separate children from higher-earning fathers.
Because that maximizes the matching funds.
Right. They award primary custody to the mother and extract maximum child support from the father because the state's own budget benefits from the transaction. The state effectively replaces the father as the head of the household, reducing the actual biological father to a weekend visitor and a permanent ATM.
Okay, let me use another analogy to crystallize exactly what Riker is describing here. He is essentially comparing the modern family court system to a rigged casino.
A rigged casino, right.
Society pressures young men to sit down at the blackjack table. That's the cultural expectation of marriage. But once a man is at the table and his chips are on the felt, the house changes the rules mid-game.
Right, no fault divorce.
Exactly. Suddenly, your opponent can cash out your chips whenever she wants. The dealer takes half your future earnings as a penalty for playing. And if you try to leave the table or refuse to pay, armed guards threaten to take your driver's license, freeze your passport, and throw you in a cage. When the game is rigged that egregiously, the only winning move is to refuse to walk into the casino in the first place.
That is exactly the rationale behind the marriage strike. And Riker draws this fascinating historical parallel to show that this reaction isn't unprecedented. He points to the 19th century Shakers.
The Shakers.
Yeah, the Shakers were a celibate Christian sect in America. The men in this community chose to completely opt out of traditional family structures. But they didn't just sit around and do nothing.
What did they do?
Instead of building families, they built exquisite, mathematically perfect, handcrafted furniture. They channeled their masculine drive into absolute mastery and creation outside the bounds of a state-sanctioned marriage contract.
Oh, I see.
Riker is arguing that history rhymes. When a gynocentric state heavily penalizes masculinity and weaponizes the legal system against providers, highly intelligent men do not riot in the streets, they simply opt out entirely. They trade the chaos and legal peril of modern dating for peace, sovereignty, and solitary mastery.
So, if men are mitigating their legal risks by abandoning the domestic institutions of marriage and family, how does this defensive posture translate to their professional lives? According to Riker, the exact same guilt by default mechanism from family court has simply been copy-pasted into corporate America and universities.
Yes, this is where Riker outlines what he sees as the ultimate mechanism of public enforcement. If family court controls the private sphere and extracts wealth, HR departments and academia control the public sphere and extract compliance.
Compliance above all else.
Right. He describes these corporate and academic entities as a literal woke inquisition that has weaponized policies like believe all women to eliminate male competition and enforce absolute ideological submission.
He calls them the digital Salem witch trials, and he really brings the receipts here. Like, he looks back at the 2006 Duke lacrosse case, where young men were crucified by the media and university administrators as privileged predators based entirely on false accusations, long before DNA evidence inevitably proved their total innocence.
Like their lives were almost ruined.
And he points to the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings as an example of how uncorroborated, decades-old claims can be used to attempt to vaporize a lifetime of professional service. To Riker, these aren't isolated incidents or mistakes in the system. They're the intended feature of a system designed to keep men constantly terrified and off balance.
And he provides chilling examples of everyday academic and corporate life to show how far this is permeated. Take the case Professor Allen.
Oh, the microaggressions guy.
Yeah, he was a tenured professor fired from his university position, not for any physical impropriety, but because a female student claimed she imagined microaggressions during a solo office conversation about her thesis. She couldn't point to a specific insult, just a, quote, feeling of unsafety.
Just a feeling.
Right. And he was terminated for traumatic language abuse. Then there's Dr. James Carter at Yale, Carter published a peer-reviewed, methodologically sound study citing biological sex differences in workplace risk-taking preferences.
Which is pretty standard evolutionary biology.
Exactly. But within 72 hours, his tenure application was revoked for promoting regressive pseudoscience, despite no one on the committee being able to point out a single statistical flaw in his actual research.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, wait, that sounds like a dystopian novel, these have to be exaggerated. I thought the exact same thing. But it reaches levels of absolute absurdity, which Riker uses to show how pervasive the policing of everyday masculinity has become.
Yeah, the Central Park story.
Yeah, he talks about Tom in Central Park. Tom was simply grilling a ribeye steak on a $20 portable grill and having a conversation with a friend about evolutionary biology.
Just minding his own business.
A woman walking by called the cops on him and reported his, quote, aggressive meat preparation and conversation as a display of toxic masculinity that made her fear for her safety.
Wait, seriously, over a steak?
Yes. The police actually showed up and interrogated him. Riker uses this to say, look, you can't even sear a piece of meat in public without the woke Inquisition attempting to criminalize your existence and deploy armed state agents against you.
It's wild. And the statistics he presents to back up this climate of fear are really sobering. He cites Innocence Project data showing that up to 65% of wrongful convictions in specific categories involve false accusations.
That's a huge percentage.
It is. Furthermore, he points to anonymous industry surveys showing that 68% of tech workers admit to heavily self-censoring their opinions to avoid woke mobs. And 62% of male academics self-censor on anything related to gender or biology to avoid career suicide.
What's fascinating here is where Riker introduces some intensely provocative terminology to describe the men who actually enable this system, because it's not just women enforcing this.
No, not at all.
He talks about the men who act as the enforcers. He compares them to the space monkeys from the movie Fight Club, brainwashed, nameless foot soldiers enforcing a system that actually despises them. He also calls them Simp Lord 3000s. These are the guys who fund massive OnlyFans empires, or the male HR reps who write groveling LinkedIn posts about their own toxic masculinity, while their male colleagues get marched to the career guillotine. Riker argues these men are funding their own oppression, hoping that if they virtue signal hard enough, the Inquisition will eat them last.
He frames this entire dynamic as a psychological and rhetorical bear trap for modern men. Women, Riker argues from an evolutionary psychology perspective, biologically seek and lust after confident, strong alpha men who display leadership and dominance.
Right.
But the prevailing cultural ideology labels those exact same traits as oppressive, patriarchal, or toxic. So if a man shows vulnerability and weakness to comply with the culture, he is deemed biologically unfit and repulsive by the very women demanding he open
Look,
up.
they can't win.
Right. But if he shows traditional strength and leadership to attract a mate, he is labeled a systemic oppressor and fired by HR. The Kafkaesque logic ensures that the man is always wrong, keeping him in a state of perpetual apology.
And he traces this back to who actually holds the institutional levers of power today. And I want you, the listener, to consider this question deeply because it challenges the fundamental narrative we are taught. Riker cites that 78% of tenure committees in the social sciences and a massive majority of corporate HR departments are now dominated by women.
That's a lot of institutional control.
It is. Now, I have to push back just a bit. Does this statistic actually mean we live in a matriarchy? Or is it just that women dominate administrative roles while men still hold the CEO positions?
That's a fair question.
Regardless of how you interpret the exact power dynamics, Riker's conclusion is absolute. Trying to play by the rules of this captured system, hoping you will be treated fairly if you just keep your head down, is a fool's errand.
Exactly. Riker insists that the institutions, the family courts, the corporate boards, the universities, they cannot be reformed from within. The rot is too deep. The ideological capture is complete.
Voting harder won't fix it.
Right, voting harder won't fix it. And this brings us to the great pivot of the book. If you can't win the game and the rules are rigged against you, you don't keep playing. You flip the board and build your own game.
This is where Riker moves from diagnosis to prescription. He advocates for what he calls the Sparta paradox and the frontier mentality. He is telling men to completely ignore bureaucratic, woke constraints and build entirely new parallel empires.
He looks at how actual progress and civilizational advancement occur. It isn't through consensus building, committee meetings, or sensitivity training.
So how does it happen?
Well, he points to Elon Musk. Musk notoriously expects his engineers to work weekends, sleep on the factory floor during production crunches, and prioritize mission over work-life balance. Riker cites Harvard Business Review data showing that 78% of male founders put in weekend hours, compared to 41% of women running startups.
Wow, that's almost double.
Yeah. Riker's point isn't just about hours worked. It's that empire building requires an obsessive, sleep-deprived, almost maniacal level of male ambition and risk tolerance that modern HR departments actively try to stamp out as toxic workplace culture.
He brings up Larry Page and Sergey Brin building the first iteration of Google in a Menlo Park garage. They had a 12-volt coffee maker and some servers. They didn't have DEI permits.
Right.
They didn't have diversity consultants asking if their early search engine algorithms centered marginalized voices. They just had raw intellect, drive, and a singular focus on building a machine that worked. Riker insists that civilization is forged in leaky garages by men too busy inventing the future to care about anyone's feelings.
But here's the critical logistical question Riker asks. How do you fund and structure these new empires if the traditional banking system is also captured?
Yeah, because they can just freeze your money.
Exactly. If you build a great company, but your corporate bank account can be frozen because you expressed the wrong political opinion, you aren't truly sovereign. Riker points his readers directly toward cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. He calls crypto digital gold for real men.
And he contrasts this fiercely with the impending rollout of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. Riker views traditional fiat banking and CBDCs as the ultimate tools of state-controlled surveillance.
Complete surveillance, yeah.
He explains the mechanism of programmable money, how bureaucrats like Christine Lagarde could theoretically program your digital dollars so you can't buy red meat, or you can't donate to a specific political campaign, or your money literally expires if you don't spend it fast enough to stimulate the economy.
Yeah, that's the scary part of CBDCs.
He literally calls CBDCs dick surveillance.
His solution to this financial panopticon is radical. He says delete your Coinbase account, burn your KYC, your customer documents, and learn to run your own Bitcoin or blockchain nodes.
Go completely off-grid financially.
Basically, yeah. He notes that 92% of blockchain developers are men. He sees the blockchain not just as a financial tool, but as a cryptographic bedrock, where unforgeable truth can exist entirely outside the reach of the state.
Pure math.
Right. It is an unregulated, purely meritocratic frontier where mathematical competence is the only metric that matters and where nobody can confiscate your labor.
But these parallel empires aren't just digital, right? Men need physical spaces to gather, plan, and exist without surveillance. Riker documents the rise of what he calls based bars or based clubs.
Oh, this part was so interesting.
Yeah, he uses Miami-Dade County as an example, claiming these underground invite-only speakeasies now outnumber Starbucks in certain zip codes. And these aren't normal bars, they are equipped with architectural Faraday cages.
Faraday cages.
Yeah, copper mesh built right into the walls to completely block cell signals.
The mechanism there is vital. By blocking cell signals, they prevent tracking, they prevent recording, and they force absolute presence in the room. They are password protected. They serve drinks like testosterone old fashions with ice tongs shaped like eagle talons.
I just love the imagery there. It's so visceral. So what does this all mean when we look at the macro trend? If we think about it, we can compare these based clubs and underground crypto networks directly to Prohibition-era speakeasies.
That's a great comparison.
But instead of smuggling illegal alcohol to bypass the 18th Amendment, these modern networks are smuggling unpoliced masculinity, unregulated capital, and unfiltered conversation to bypass the woke inquisition. They're creating black markets for logic and brotherhood.
The socioeconomic theory Riker is advancing here is profound. He is advocating for a complete and total fiat matrix exit. He is telling men to trade corporate compliance, HR-approved language, and state-monitored banking for underground bartering networks, cash-only gyms, and decentralized smart contracts.
It's a total decoupling.
Yeah. He even cites Harvard anthropology data showing that historically, polygynous societies where top-tier, highly successful men aren't constrained by state-enforced monogamy have 23% higher male productivity rates. He is arguing that when you remove the bureaucratic and legal shackles, male creative and economic output explodes.
But Riker knows that you can't just build a massive parallel institution if you are fundamentally weak yourself. You can't build a digital or physical empire if your testosterone is in the gutter and you are surviving on soy lattes and SSRIs.
Right, you have to fix yourself first.
Exactly. To build these new worlds, a man must first completely reconstruct his own biology and psychology. That brings us to the final and perhaps most intense part of the book: gym theology, the Spartan diet, and the red pill library.
This is the most prescriptive, personal section of the text. Riker outlines a draconian, almost monastic set of physical, mental, and spiritual protocols designed to purge modern softness and forge what he calls the modern demigod.
That's pretty extreme.
It begins, fundamentally, with what you put into your body.
The Spartan diet. He tells his readers to eat heavily, specifically prioritizing red meat. He says to eat steak so red it makes vegans cry.
That's a very Riker way to put it.
It is. He demands men cut soy completely out of their diets, arguing the phytoestrogens act as a chemical poison to the male endocrine system, and he is absolutely obsessed with microplastics. He tells men to throw out all their Tupperware and only microwave their food in glass containers to avoid BPA plastics leaching into their meals.
And he doesn't just say this to be contrary, he backs it up with a 2018 Harvard study showing that men with high BPA levels in their urine have 35% less motile sperm.
35%. That's huge. I need to throw out my Tupperware.
Yeah, he explains the exact mechanism. Endocrine disruptors mimic estrogen, binding to receptors and telling the male body to stop producing testosterone. To Riker, diet isn't about looking good at the beach, it is literal biological warfare against a chemically castrating environment.
And that biological warfare continues in the gym. He introduces the concept of gym theology. He tells the story of Tim, a 35-year-old software engineer who realized his modern soft lifestyle was literally killing him.
So what did Tim do?
Tim started deadlifting heavy barbells in his garage while blasting the band Motorhead, eventually shedding 100 pounds of what Riker terms male guilt.
Male guilt, wow.
Yeah. Tim now runs a cash-only garage gym, teaching teenage boys how to squat properly, acting as a modern-day Hephaestus forging warriors instead of coding apps for a tech overlord. For Riker, lifting heavy weights isn't exercise, it is spiritual warfare. The iron doesn't lie, doesn't care about your feelings, it is objective truth.
He also introduces a psychological framework he calls the Phoenix Principle. He uses a brilliant pop culture analogy for this: Rocky Balboa.
Okay, how so?
Well, when Rocky lost to Apollo Creed, or when he had to face Ivan Drago, he didn't go find a therapist in Philadelphia and journal about his feelings of inadequacy or his childhood trauma.
No, he went to the woods.
Exactly. He went to Siberia, carried massive logs in the freezing snow, and punched communism in the face. Riker believes that depression is fundamentally misunderstood by modern psychology. He says depression isn't just a chemical imbalance to be medicated away, it is often your ancestors screaming at you from your DNA to stop consuming garbage, stop sitting in a chair, and start building something. The cure for male depression is action, not introspection.
What's really fascinating about this is that Riker isn't actually offering men freedom in the traditional sense. He's offering them a much stricter set of rules: diet, heavy lifting, stoicism. It implies that modern men aren't suffering from too many rules, but from a total lack of meaningful structure.
That is a brilliant psychological insight. Riker is actively leveraging evolutionary biology to justify his complete rejection of modern body positivity movements for men.
Right.
He cites OkCupid data showing that 68% of women on the platform swipe right on men who display physical dominance. Men who have broad shoulders, narrow waists, and look like they could, in his words, snap a bear's spine.
He calls this the peacock effect, right?
Yes, the peacock effect. He explains that biological reality does not care about feminist feelings or equity theories. Hierarchies are biological facts, and women are hardwired by millions of years of evolution to select mates who display genetic superiority through physical markers of strength and protection. Therefore, embracing weakness or fat acceptance as a man is literal evolutionary suicide.
And he doesn't just want men physically strong, he wants them mentally lethal. He outlines the Nietzsche reset, which advocates for a pragmatic, almost utilitarian return to monotheism.
Religion as a tool.
Exactly. Riker doesn't necessarily care if a man literally believes in the theological details of God, but he deeply believes in the societal utility of the religious framework: faith, family, and fortitude. He notes that 80% of Fortune 500 CEOs attend weekly religious services. He points to clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson's massive audience, which is 78% male.
The implication is clear. Men are starving for structure. They crave fierce justice, divine purpose, and rigid hierarchy, not safe spaces and group hugs. Riker views secular atheism as a bug in the cultural software that corrupts men into passive, nihilistic drones. Conversely, a structured, demanding belief system acts as psychological armor. It gives men a reason to endure suffering.
I have to ask you, the listener, to ponder this because it's a staggering paradigm shift. Riper advocates for swapping Karl Marx for Moses, using religion strictly for its utility to enforce discipline and build fiercely loyal tribes. What does it say about the state of modern men that they are seeking out strict spiritual frameworks, not necessarily for divine salvation, but purely as tactical survival tools to navigate a culture they view as relentlessly hostile?
It says that the search for meaning has become a matter of life and death. And to arm the mind for this survival, Riker mandates a specific, rigorous reading regimen. He highlights the combat library of Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, as a starting point.
Yeah, he calls it the Spartan stack.
Right. Riker provides his own Spartan stack of mandatory reading, Sun Tzu's The Art of War to learn how to outthink the enemy, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations to learn how to outlast the suffering, and Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged to learn how to outwork the parasites.
And he is absolutely adamant about the medium, no audiobooks.
Right, he hates audiobooks.
He says audiobooks are passive consumption for soy boys with participation trophies. He demands men read physical, paper books, wrestling with dense prose in silence. He explains the mechanism of deep reading versus passive listening, arguing that physical reading builds neurological focus.
And he has a stat for that too.
He does. He throws in a stat claiming that men who read 10 physical pages a day receive 78% more career promotions because of that enhanced focus. Your bookshelf, he says, should look like an armory, not a Martha Stewart catalog.
Bringing all of these elements together, the biological awareness of endocrine disruptors, the financial sovereignty of crypto, the physical dominance of the gym, and the intellectual armament of the Spartan stack, leads us directly to Riker's final, uncompromising call to action in his epilogue.
So let's distill the core ethos of this deep dive. We have unpacked a text that operates as a literal, step-by-step blueprint for total institutional and personal rebellion.
With total rebellion.
Riker is asking men to do something incredibly difficult. To entirely refuse the guilt placed on them by modern society, to unapologetically embrace biological hierarchies and natural dominance, to build unassailable physical and financial leverage, and to form uncompromising decentralized tribes that operate completely outside the gaze of the state.
It is a manifesto for secession. Secession from the fiat banking system, secession from the family courts, secession from woke corporate HR structures, and secession from a culture that pathologized the very masculinity that built it.
Which leaves us with one massive, lingering question. A final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. We've looked closely at Riker's blueprint. We've seen the data he uses and the mechanisms he outlines. But what if it actually works?
That's the real question.
If Riker's vision comes to pass and a massive demographic of young, capable, highly driven men successfully unplugs from the state, abandons the family courts, drains their capital from fiat currency into crypto, and starves mainstream academia to build these parallel empires, does that lead to the quiet, inevitable collapse of our current social order? Or does it lead to the chaotic, explosive birth of a completely new one?
When the foundation is replaced, the building must either fall or become something else entirely.
We started by talking about the foundation of a skyscraper. After reading Riker, you might realize that the concrete isn't just crumbling. The engineers who built it are packing up their tools and walking away to build a fortress in the hills. If you found this exploration fascinating and want to read the source material yourself, check out The Gods Among Us by Conrad Riker, available for purchase right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
You can also follow the author at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
Thank you for joining us in the deep end today. Please remember to like and subscribe to the show for more deep dives.